A teenager writes a detailed plan for a crime, 18 pages, and no one takes it seriously. But just months later, that plan becomes reality. This is the story of Kemi Adeyoola, a 17-year-old girl from London, whose life took a disturbing turn. On the surface, she had everything. A wealthy family, opportunities, a future. But behind that, things were different. As a teenager, she began getting into trouble. Theft, repeated offenses, eventually leading to time in a youth detention center. And that's where something happened that would later shock investigators. She wrote a document, 18 pages long. Inside, it was a detailed plan. How to choose a victim, how to enter a home, how to avoid suspicion. At the time, it was seen as nothing more than a fantasy. Just writing, nothing serious. But it wasn't. After her release, Kemi returned to normal life. At least that's how it seemed. But the plan was already there. Thought through, prepared. And then one day she acted. On March 19, 2005, she went to the home of her former neighbor, an elderly woman. What followed was a tragedy that shocked the local community. The victim was later found by her husband. When he returned home, at first investigators had very little to go on, but one small detail changed everything. A trace found at the scene did not belong to the victim. That single clue led them to Kemi. As the evidence came together, the truth became clear. The document she had written was not just fiction. It was a plan. The case drew significant attention. Many were especially struck by the reaction of her own family. Her father publicly distanced himself, saying he could not accept what had happened. In 2006, she was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term. A story that began as words on paper, ended in real consequences. And it leaves one unsettling question. If someone had taken those pages seriously, could this have been prevented? Let me know what you think in the comments. She prepared the place in advance, days before anything happened. And the most disturbing part is that no one paid attention to it. Not her family, not her friends, not the adults around her. This is the story of Alyssa Bustamante, one of the most widely discussed juvenile crime cases in the United States. At first glance, her life looked completely ordinary. A teenager from a small town in Missouri, school, church. Normal conversations, normal days. After her parents were no longer able to care for her, custody of Alyssa and her siblings was given to her grandparents. From the outside, it seemed like things were finally becoming stable. But internally, something else was happening. By the age of 13, Alyssa began showing serious psychological struggles. She received treatment and was under professional care. During this time, she began expressing thoughts that later raised concern in hindsight. She talked about trying to understand human behavior on a deeper level, about extreme emotions and what people are capable of in certain situations, and about wanting to understand those experiences for herself. At the time, these comments were not treated as immediate danger, more like troubling teenage thoughts, but that perception would later change. Days before October 2009, something unusual happened. Alyssa went into a wooded area near her home and spent time there preparing a location that would later become a key detail in the investigation. No one questioned it. No one connected it to anything serious. On October 21st, she asked her younger sister to invite a neighborhood girl, 9-year-old Elizabeth, to go play in the woods. It sounded completely normal, something that could happen any ordinary day. And because of that, no one suspected anything unusual. They went into the forest together. And what happened there became the central focus of a major criminal case. Afterwards, Alyssa returned home, and this is the part that unsettled many people the most. She acted as if nothing had happened. She interacted with others. She continued her normal routine. A few days later, she even attended church. Meanwhile, a search for the missing girl began. At first, there was hope. Then concern grew. Soon, police, volunteers, and the local community all joined the search. The situation became more urgent with each passing day. Eventually, the body was discovered. The investigation quickly led authorities to Alyssa. For those who knew her, it was shocking. People who had seen her every day struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet teenager with what she was now being connected to. During the investigation, her personal writings and behavior were examined, and within them were details that later raised deeper questions about her mental state and about how warning signs can sometimes go unnoticed when they are not fully understood in time. The trial took place in 2012. Alyssa Bustamante pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years, along with an additional extended sentence. But the case did not end with the verdict, because one question still remains. Let's go back to the beginning. She prepared a location in advance, days before anything happened. And no one asked the most important question about why would a teenager do that? That question still lingers today. And maybe that is the real point of this story, because sometimes tragedies do not happen suddenly. Sometimes they build quietly in places where early signs are overlooked. And by the time anyone notices, it is already too late to ask the questions that could have changed everything. This case wasn't discovered. It was reconstructed. From fragments, old reports, unfinished records, statements that were never meant to be connected. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they point to something that shouldn't exist. Norway, late 1800s. Multiple documents mention the same location. Not as a headline, not as a major case, just references. A property, remote, difficult to access, easy to forget. At first, nothing stands out, until you notice the repetition, the same descriptions, the same outcomes, and one recurring detail: people don't leave the way they arrived. The earliest confirmed incident is classified as an accident, a carriage found below a steep drop. 3 passengers. No clear cause, no evidence of external interference. And yet, the report includes a line that investigators couldn't properly explain. Surface conditions inconsistent with surrounding terrain. In simpler terms, everything at the site was frozen differently, not colder, just wrong. The case was filed and closed, but the location remained. And over time, new entries appeared, not connected officially, but connected geographically. Missing arrivals, interrupted journeys, unfinished tasks, all leading back to the same point. And gradually, one name starts appearing in proximity to these entries. Not as a suspect, not as a witness, just present: Elsa Hansson. No accusations were made, no conclusions were drawn, because nothing directly linked her to any event. And that's exactly what made the pattern difficult to ignore, because in every case, she was close enough to be noticed, but never close enough to be questioned. Then something changed. Not in the incidents, in the descriptions. People who spent time at the property began reporting similar observations, independently, without coordination. They described the same subtle shift. The environment didn't feel dangerous. It felt unresponsive, as if normal reactions were delayed. Sound didn't travel the same way. Temperature didn't feel stable. Movement felt slightly resisted. Nothing extreme, but consistent. And consistency turns perception into concern. Around this period, another detail becomes consistent. A man named Olof Bjornsson, listed in records related to the estate. Same role, same function, across multiple years, unchanged, which makes him one of two things: either irrelevant to the pattern or central to it. There's no middle ground. Then comes the event that stands out even among everything else. A scheduled departure, documented, expected, routine. No urgency, no conflict, just someone leaving. Weather conditions were recorded the night before, normal for the region, nothing severe. But the next morning, the person is no longer present. No departure trail, no confirmed direction, no indication they exited the property at all. Search efforts expand. Nothing is found. And once again, the report ends without conclusion. But this time, something is different. Behavior changes. Gradually, consistently, people begin adjusting their actions. Shorter visits, limited interaction, avoidance without explanation. Because at this point, the pattern no longer needs proof. It only needs repetition. And repetition creates certainty, even in the absence of evidence. Over time, the location stops being treated as ordinary, not abandoned, but avoided. And a name begins to circulate, quietly, repeated carefully, not official, but persistent. The Queen of the North, not as a symbol of status, as a way to reference something without defining it, because defining it would require understanding it. And that never happened. Years later, when archived materials were reviewed together, one entry stood out. Not part of the main timeline, not connected at the time. A report from the surrounding mountains. Witnesses described a stationary light. Low intensity, unusual tone. Not fire, not atmospheric, something else. And within that light, a figure, motionless, observed but not interacting. At the time, it was dismissed, logged as a natural anomaly. But when aligned with everything that followed, it introduces a different interpretation, that the estate wasn't the source. It was the center, a fixed point, where conditions behaved differently, where outcomes repeated, where presence mattered more than action, which explains the one detail no report could resolve, why nothing was ever directly observed. Because whatever was happening didn't need to act, it only needed to be there, and everything else adjusted around it, including the people, including Elsa Hansson. Which means the real question was never, what happened at that estate? But this, what was already there. Before anyone arrived,